My vision for a robust and diversified textile waste sector in Ontario. I know that I've been doing a lot of picking apart of the Markham model, and I'll probably do a little bit more. It's my favorite thing. Um, but I should provide an alternative, and that's actually a criticism that was made to me that I feel was quite valid. I actually heard it from more than one person. Like, okay, then what do you suggest? You know what I mean? So today we're going to give you what I suggest, which is actually the model that I was hoping to see implemented in Aurora. Unfortunately, City Council refused to scale it. And Markham then came in with their program and were so aggressive in the marketing of it. Um, and when you're partnered with big brand charities like Salvation Army that have a great reputation, nobody wants to publicly admit out loud that they disagree with the program because it looks like you're picking on Salvation Army and or diabetes, and that's not what this is. Now, I'm hostile with diabetes because their main lobbyist is very aggressive in replicating the Markham program in other municipalities. And if you go on the diabetes website, you'll see yourself how many municipalities they have partnerships with or that they're working with on something. So that is alarming to me because if I were to see the Markham program implemented all across Ontario, the majority of participants in the sector would be put out of business because the Markham program, unlike most other municipalities, is incredibly restrictive in terms of entry. There's a huge barrier to entry, including some arbitrary deadline. So when I started the Aurora thing, so York Region chose textile waste diversion to create the first municipal program for textile waste, and it was a combination of bins and curbside. And we started very small because this was the first. I was already doing both extensively, including curbside, but independently. This was the first time I was doing it for a municipality, and the pressure was on. So we decided to start small, which I had no problem with. I was grateful, right? And then slowly we started to scale it, which we did. But I wanted to scale it to now, like, actually, let's stop talking about what we're going to do and actually do it in a meaningful way. And that's when City Council stalled it. So when it came time to renew the contract, it was like, what for? We're not even really, what for? So but my vision for what I wanted for Aurora and Stouffville and York Region and everybody else didn't exclude anybody. So here's my version. This is my antidote to Markham, okay? When I approached this, first of all, I had to make an internal decision. Am I going to create a program that's going to be amazing for textile waste diversion because that's who I work for? Or am I going to approach this as I'm going to take the TWD hat off for 5 seconds and I'm going to look at this as an economic development opportunity for Ontario, knowing that at the very least, whatever that paradigm turned into, I'm a smart enough girl that I will find a way to pivot my operations so that my brand will fit this new paradigm, whatever it's going to be. So I decided to approach it from that angle. So when I was looking at that, I said, okay, so then it's not about me getting a monopoly. It's not about me getting a bigger market share than anybody else. And frankly, I don't need it. We're a small family business. So as long as me and my brothers, you know what I mean, can keep a roof over our head and fill our fridge, we're good. So I thought, the pressure's not that bad. I don't need to have 100 million pounds a year to process. So it's not that much. I can do this, So I'm looking at the sector and how am I going to create diversity? So I thought, okay, well, 85% of all textiles are still going to landfill. We're only capturing 25%, which is small, but it's still a quarter of the problems already solved. So I'm not going to, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? So I'm going to leave those players to do what they do because they're already solving 25% of my problem. Why would I go and take what they're already doing when I have 85% of the pie? I need to figure out how to capture, because for whatever reason, with 25 years and horrible competition. You wouldn't believe the competition in this industry. It's a blood sport with all the competing and everything else, and everybody's ambition and everyone's greed, because there's a lot of greed too. How come they can only get that 25%? As greedy as these bastards are, you would think by now they would have found a way to at least get half of Ontario's textile waste, but they weren't. So my issue was, how do I figure out why they're not growing and how do I grow that? So my first thing was, let's educate the public and make this a huge public education thing, but so that all of them that are already collecting, many of whom were my clients, so this would have benefited me indirectly anyway, is to get Aurora residents and Stouffville residents to donate to the bins that are already there. So let's just change the stigma, because at the time used clothing bins still had a bit of a negative stigma. So let's really do public education so that they start to realize that all participants have value. So pick one. All we care about is that you don't throw your textiles in the garbage. So find a bin, pick a bin, and put your clothes in there. So let's do that first. So that way, and the other thing is, I warn them, what you don't want is to go to war with the industry. I even warned them of that. Don't go to war with the industry. There's no need for you to take anybody's market share when 85% of textiles are going to landfill. So what we have to do is make sure that if Aurora and Stouffville enter the marketplace, that you benefit the market. Because if you coming in takes away anybody else's business, you're going to get a pushback. You're going to get enemies. And admittedly, there are some participants in the sector you might not want to piss off. And the lobbyists that work for charities use that to say, well, these restrictions get rid of those people. But they don't. They don't. And those people have really, really elevated their operations. They've had to, just to keep up with everybody else, right? And the press was on them. So they've all grown up anyway. So we can't keep using that because they don't really behave much like that anymore. So this is just a narrative that some, organizations use to say, well, only we should be allowed to collect, and we just demonize everybody else because maybe there's one jerk in the crowd that doesn't donate. You know what I mean? Well, don't give him clothes, and those people don't even advertise anyway. So it's not like they're attacking the majority of Ontario's textile waste. They're getting a small sliver. And to give them credit, they have the same diversion rate as the rest of us. Half the time they sell to the same people we do, frankly. And they have even opened an emerging market in a country most people would never think to start exporting to. So let's give credit where it's due, But it's so easy to just call everybody a pirate, right? Because back in the day there was some, you know what I mean? Now we're just going to paint everybody who's not this cluster a pirate. And that's where we're having some issues here. So my attitude was, who cares? They have bins in Aurora, they have bins in Stouffville, who cares? At the time, there was like 100 bins, spread through the area. Maybe they had 5 of those bins. I don't know the exact number, but it was marginal, and big deal. They have, like I said, great diversion rate. You know what I mean? Their stuff isn't going to landfill. They're supporting jobs. They're creating jobs. The only thing we can accuse them of at this point is that maybe they're not as charitable as you want them to be. You know what I mean? So Google the thing on your bin. If you don't like what they're doing or not doing or saying, then don't give to them. Go to the property next door that has a different company's bin. It's not that hard. And I think we need to stop babying the public at this point. The public pushback is why the industry has elevated. The public pushback is why it got regulated. So believe me, the public has has their own wherewithal to see where they want their stuff to go. So we have to really stop that too. So my attitude was, let's not piss anybody off. Let's not piss anybody off. And let's make sure that everybody's bins get busier because of what we're doing. So if I can get the stakeholders that are already there, like some of them even were my clients, like I said, to go from 25% to collecting even 45%, everybody in the industry will say, wow, since Aurora and Stouffville came in, since the municipalities came in, our business doubled. That's what I wanted. Then I could focus on the rest. which was still a pretty nice chunk of pie. So there was nothing for me to get greedy about, because even if I could get the rest of the industry to get a 40% capture rate, knowing that a decent market share of that industry are my customers, I'm automatically doing better anyway. So now I can focus on this rest of the pie. So let's do that. So how am I? So now it was curbside and putting in bins for the city. So my hope was that property managers, like commercial property managers, would feel safer aligning with a city logo bin than choosing a charity or whatever. Maybe they would be more inclined if this was in partnership with the city. And it turned out not one. We aggressively tried. We sent salespeople, like we aggressively tried. And not one commercial property owner was willing to do anything in partnership with the municipalities. So like, what do you want me to do? So then I asked city council to scale it, because look, Markham, when they started, they put 50 bins to start. They gave me, I think, 4 locations, 6 locations. So I'm like, come on guys, like what am I going to do with 6 locations? So if you want to start getting some counts, I need more bins. I need more locations. So I think I asked for like 20 locations, don't quote me, something like that. And city council wouldn't give me any new locations except for I think 1 or 2. But they told me I could add more bins to the locations I already had. For what? I already have bins there. What am I going to add? Come on. So that froze me. It froze me from developing it any further. And curbside, it was not worth it. It wasn't worth for the liability, the insurance, the WSIB, everything I had to do and not to mention the morale of my staff. Curbside collection killed the morale of my staff. They hated it. The pressure, and they did great. Like we did 17,000 houses and maybe we would get 4 that say they were missed, and half the time because they left it behind a hedge or somewhere we wouldn't see. And my boys weren't just grabbing it at the curb. They were walking to the porch to grab it. So this was hard. But for the amount of people that participated, it wasn't even worth it. Not fiscally anyway. But it was a good, conversation. It got people talking about it. It got people educated, and it got, the competing bins. So all the people that were already participating, their bins were all getting busier. So at first, the people that were in Aurora, Stouffville competing against me weren't so bitter, because they were like, my bins are kind of busier since you started doing that. So far, so good. But then all of a sudden, unbeknownst to me, my competitors start losing bins. So when we're seeing this, the cities start to say, well, I'm doing stuff, so I'm going to take everybody else out. We're forgetting that 85% of textiles are going to landfill. So why are you just taking cookies from one jar to put it in another? We need more cookies. Like, you know what I mean? So this is what municipalities are doing, and they're missing the opportunity to do this. And this is why I get hostile. There are some municipalities like Kitchener, for example, Cambridge out that way. They have full intentions of putting in their own textile program, but they're probably at least 2 years away from it at this point. And yet they've already wiped out quite a few participants that we're collecting. So when that happens, where do you think the clothes go? They go back to landfill. So since municipalities have started implementing these measures to try and kick out the bad guys, the only thing, those bad guys are still in the industry. Now they all have fancy logos. You know what I mean? So unless you know their personal history, you're never going to know who the organizations were that were bad guys, because those bad guys now have brands that are looking pretty good. So they've grown up. Everybody's grown up. And it would be easy for me to say, well, they should never be allowed to play because they used to be a jerk. But then we were saying that we were mad because these participants were not charitable. They were not a brand. They were not wah, 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 wah. Now they're doing all those things. Everything you said you want them to do, they're doing. So why are you still mad? They've changed their behavior. So instead, let's stop with the virtue signaling of, he's a jerk, he shouldn't be allowed to collect. Instead, build a better brand, Diversify your business and grow it. Instead of this, everybody wants all the market share. Why? 85% of textiles are still going to landfill. Why? And here's another thing. What about trading to emerging markets? We always talk about East Africa as the only place that we can sell clothes. But before this bullshit started in South America, that was thriving. Thriving. Our South American trade was expanding by leaps and bounds. And even now, it's still moving now, even with everything that happened. But we had a few stalls. But whatever, it's moving again. So, if I don't have clothes, if I'm not collecting clothes, because that's my specialty was South America. So I was collecting mostly to supply the South American market for whatever I couldn't, sell locally. So if all the clothes are only going to collectors that are selling to organizations that go to East Africa, what happens to all the sorters and exporters and collectors that were collecting for the South American trade market? And you can keep demonizing export all you want, but let me tell you, right now we don't have another solution. But when I was collecting 33 million pounds a year, I was funding green tech. All that had to stop when regulations came in, squished me out of the market, which means now all the good stuff I was doing, I can't do anymore. And the clothing I used to collect is not going to different organizations, it's going back to the landfill. But Markham had a shit ton of bins, a shit ton, from a huge variety of companies. Huge variety was being supported by Markham. And now they're reduced to 50 bins, and you want me to applaud? I'm not going to applaud. I'm not going to applaud that. So as much as they're saying we collected, we were already doing, the private sector was already doing that. The other thing that they did was impose a deadline, some arbitrary date, that if it wasn't by this date, whatever. So what happens to somebody that wants to start a new enterprise? What happens to them? That's just stupid. And then, and also, and this is where Markham is not alone. There are several municipalities that have jumped on the virtue signal bandwagon of, unless they're a registered charity, they're not allowed to get a permit here. Ottawa is one of those. Okay, let me tell you how stupid that is. So, when you're saying only a registered charity, what you're saying is that charities have a moral superiority. They operate better and more efficiently than the private sector that's been carrying Canada's economy on its back. Really? So they should be getting a priority because they do better business. Like, I could tell you stories there too. But then what about social enterprises? In Niagara, I'm partnered with Small Scale Farms, which is a social enterprise, not a registered charity. The thing is, she runs it like a nonprofit. So she personally runs it like a nonprofit. Any excess that she receives goes back into the community. So she runs it like one, but she technically isn't one, because small scale farms, she wants to protect small scale farms. And sometimes being a social enterprise, for business reasons, it's better to be that than a registered charity. But now this means that even though she runs her business like a nonprofit and is actually tackling food insecurity, not in an enabling way, but she's actually tackling it in a fundamental way that is having a transformative effect in Niagara, right? I cannot do that in many, because I could easily take what Renee is doing. Hey, Renee, today I'm going to take you to Ottawa and you're going to recreate this in Ottawa. I could do that, but I can't because she's not technically a registered charity. So even though, in my opinion, she does a hell of a lot better job than a lot of the charities in this industry, they won't even let her apply. That's stupid. And I'll tell you especially why it's stupid, because 3/4 of the charities that apply for permits aren't the ones actually collecting the clothes. Even Diabetes uses Clothesline. Textile waste diversion. Do you know how many bins I collect for? Lots. Different clients that say, here, put my logo on I'll let you use my logo if you give me money, so, and Textile Waste Diversion does the collecting, and the same in Ottawa, the charities have the permits and it's their logo on the bin, but it's a private collector that's collecting the bins and running the route. So it's all smoke and mirrors. When I actually created Textile Waste Diversion, the brand, because we existed as an Ontario Inc. number many, many years ago, because back in the day, that was the norm, is everybody was hiding behind these charities. They put charity logo on the bin, but you didn't know it was an Ontario Inc. 123 that was picking up the bin. And I said, the public's sick of that. Why don't we just stop bullshitting the public and just say, no, we're a family business, and I gave us a name, Textile Waste Diversion, and paid someone a lot of money to create a logo and a tagline and a website, and my father said, you're crazy. You're going to ruin us. You're crazy. And instead we were embraced by the public because it was like, finally, and I actually have many people that donate to my bins saying specifically because we're not a registered charity, because whatever. My issue, I don't care about the charity part, because like I said, I'll just give one money to let me use their logo. It's not that hard. So whatever. My issue with creating a diverse market isn't that I want to disenfranchise one charity so that another one can get a monopoly. I don't care who you are. I don't even care if you are a charity. What I care about is, are you and you want me to say, well, I hope you care that these pirates aren't throwing things in the garbage. Now let's really start breaking down some logic here, okay? Price of gas, price of trucks, price of labor, price of everything, price of lawyers to operate in this industry, insurance and everything else. Do you really think I'm going to spend, or any pirate would spend all that money to go collect clothes to then pay a dump to take? So where's the business model in that? Where's the money to be made? Why would anybody do that? So these are the little spins that some of these monopolists are using to try and kick everybody else out. Well, you don't know where they put the clothes. Actually, I surveil them. Yeah, I surveil the pirates. And some of them sell to the same places that, some of the big charities sell to. So if you think, especially right now, because the industry is shrinking so much because of all of this regulation stuff, sorting facilities have closed down, so now it's small, the market's getting very small. So the end market is small. The end market is small too. So why we're pretending they have the same diversion rate that we do, because there's no money in throwing something in the garbage. That's the whole point of what we do, is we keep things from going to the garbage and find a way to make money. So these guys will sell every teacup they pull out of one of those things, even though we're into textiles. They'll find a way to make money on the teacups you throw in there. So it's bullshit. It's bullshit. So let's talk about what a diverse, robust economy would look like, right? So now, theoretically, we've got everybody collecting at 40% instead of 25%, and now municipalities are capturing the rest. So how does that look to Canada? Frightening. Frightening. I'll tell you why. Because we're not prepared for that kind of volume. So what would happen is we would have too much supply. The commodity would crash. That's just what would happen. So it would actually be a disaster. If I got my wish, it would be a disaster. So when we're talking about scaling and growing this waste we need to be very careful that the solutions, because we focus so much on the collection, what do we do when we've collected this stuff? Where do we put it, right? So only 20% of what's collected, roughly, is good enough to be sold in the local economy, whether it's done through local thrift stores for the better quality stuff, or rags, because the rag stuff is normally kept in Canada and the US for the stuff that's really shitty. But then we have this big, gap of stuff that not good enough, not bad enough to be destroyed, not good enough to, put in a local thrift store. No one in Canada is going to buy it. Even if you gave it away, no one's going to want it. So where do we send it? And right now, like I said, there's East Africa, there's South America, but they can only handle so much. They can handle a hell of a lot more than we're sending them right now. Maybe not East Africa, they're sick of our shit. But there are emerging markets right now that can gobble up pretty much whatever we send. And because we used to send a lot more prior to regulations than we are now, we could, there's room to get back to that. Now, when things were good, when we were collecting and there wasn't municipalities involved and whatever, I'll tell you how things are a little bit different and better. And now that we have some of those nasty players out, I think we should try and get back to that a little bit, is that there weren't a lot of, it was a very free and open market. So you had for-profit collectors, you had charity collectors, you had for-profit collectors that were partnered with charity collectors, you had independent sorting facilities, and you had mom and pop thrift shops. And they would all buy off collectors, right? And then they would either sort themselves or they'd go through a sorter. So there were lots of middlemen, which is often painted as a bad thing. They say, oh, there's middlemen. It goes through middlemen. Are you going to sort it? Like, you know what I mean? I don't want to sort it. I'll collect it and ship it to you, but I'm not touching it. I want somebody else to sort it. So, you know what I mean? So anyway, so there was all this huge stuff. So what that looked like when you're actually in the industry, okay, was that I would collect a trailer and see who was going to give me the most money for it. And as a broker, because I also broker, a charity would call me and say, hey, I got a trailer. What do you give me? And if I would say whatever cents and they would say, well, so-and-so is going to give me 5 cents more, I would say, thank you, because you just raised the commodity price. So next week when I have a trailer, I'm going to call him and tell him I want 5 cents more, 6 cents more, So there was these big bidding wars that would happen. So what do we do to avoid a commodity crash? I don't know. If we get to like 100% capture rate, we're in so much trouble. So much trouble. So I guess the first thing, let's talk about the 20% that we collect, right, of volume that is good enough to be sold locally. Now, stigmatized views of thrift stores that are known to be more budget or low income is probably not going to be able to handle all of that volume. So what we were seeing was a blossoming of the secondhand economy in Ontario through the opening of several different thrift store chains that were all going after different target markets. The competition in the thrift store industry is getting huge in Ontario. And we're seeing some real niche fashion forward kind of stores, and the branding is very much elevated. So we are now becoming more attractive to middle income earners and not just low income. So by using gentrification in a very conscious way, we can increase the demand for local use clothing and therefore applications where we can use more of this stuff locally in a way that generates revenue and creates jobs. So that's the first thing, is really pushing the competition of the thrift store market. Then of course developing emerging markets around the globe, because the countries that are receiving our clothes in bulk, some at least in East Africa, claim that we are impacting their garment sector because of the volume that we're sending. There are arguments for and against that. So I'm not going to say that that is an absolute fact. You can argue that point in both directions. However, that's their claim. And there's some, trade tensions we're getting right there. A tariff deal in Kenya that makes me curious. But in any case, we need to develop emerging markets overseas so that we have more access to markets for the stuff that we end up collecting more of. And then, of course, for the stuff that is not so great quality, we can only make so many rags. There's only so many mechanics. So we need to look at green tech. So let's talk about green tech. Germany decided it wanted a green tech revolution, and it started to look at different waste industries and realized that green tech was actually being undermined by the big monopolies that were trying to keep the status quo. So what Germany did to start the green tech revolution had nothing to do with municipal programs for collection or anything like that, or investing in green tech even. What they did was gave legislative teeth to members in parliament to go after monopolies. So anywhere they saw an industry Goliath or monopolization, they actively undermined that Goliath. And then what they did was they incentivized private sector participation in those industries. And it's competition that then drives that innovation. We're seeing this now in the manufacturing sector of fashion, one of the worst polluters they have been accused of. I've heard they certainly could be better, but they're actively trying, and it's become the new trend to be, sustainable in fashion manufacturing. So now they're all competing over who has the cooler textile thing, or who's doing what with jeans, and Adidas is making shoes out of plastic, you know what I mean? So that's kind of already happening. Now we need to see this happen on the end life of things. And again, some could argue that that development has been willfully undermined in Canada. In any case, when Germany went through this, they said, okay, well, we're going to get rid of the big Goliaths because they have way too much power. They have way too much lobby power. And they're the ones that are creating a status quo. We often fall into the thinking that if something is so big, then it's too big to fail, right? Jordan Peterson said it perfectly when he said, no, actually, when you get so big, failure is inevitable. It's one of the reasons that I don't have major market share ambitions for textile waste diversion beyond what I need to take care of my family. I don't want to become a Goliath because I'm so small and nimble right now that every time the industry shifts, which it has quite a bit in the last few years, I'm able to pivot real easy. I've decentralized my operations, so I'm able to pivot and change as the industry changes. I couldn't do that if I was big, bulky, and clumsy. So these big Goliaths end up suffering blockbuster video 2.0 syndrome, and nobody wants to say it out loud, unfortunately. So what they're doing is they're using their strength and their dominance to maintain the status quo. But if we did what Germany did, so if we were to do what Germany did, Markham's pilot would be dismantled because it did not incentivize participation, which is what Germany's priority was. Any policy that had to come in the waste sector had to incentivize participation from a diverse roster of business, not just one kind or one cluster. So anywhere they saw these big oligarchies or whatever, they started to dismantle them, and they started bringing in a lot of competition. So then when you're competing, everybody's trying to be either more efficient or more creative. Everybody finds their own niche of what they're good at or what they become known for. And then, the cream rises to the anybody who's shitty kind of falls to the wayside. So that's what happens when you have a robust industry. So if we had this robust industry, if Aurora had allowed me to do Aurora City Council, because Aurora's waste staff got it, but City Council did not allow us to be as productive as we could have. And then it became a waste of time. But had we were able to do that, companies that were already collecting, the charities, the big diverse roster of charities that were already collecting in Aurora would have all doubled their business. Everybody would have got more money. Every disease would get more research money. Every food bank or whatever it is would get more money. People would have become so well educated in this industry that they would start to know who to give their clothes to. They would have become better educated. There's no reason to legislate people out of this industry. Educate people out of this industry. They're shrinking by the day. The very pirates you claim to have to fight it, they're so small now. And like I said, half of them don't even act like pirates anymore. So what are you doing? What are you doing? Let people make a living. If 85% of textiles going to landfill, let people make a living. Instead of trying to take the 25% from one stakeholder and gobbling it up to another, how about we go after the 85% that's still going to landfill? That was my priority. That was my priority. I wanted to double everybody's business and then go after the rest. That's what Markham should be doing.